Thank you for your time. My name is Baytula, and this is Bet On It, Shooting from the Hip. I appreciate you being here. Please keep in mind what we are doing here on Bet On It, Shooting from the Hip. We explore human ideas, philosophies, noteworthy information. This exploration is us thinking aloud, a thought exercise, jumping into ideas and examining them and re-examining them. You will find that we are prone to using adult language and expressing opinions. In keeping with that, you shouldn't believe anything we say. We are not experts of any kind. We are just having fun with these ideas, philosophies, and information in the hopes that you will find it fun and interesting and entertaining. We encourage you to invest time in searching out these subjects and come to your own conclusions. Now on with the shit show. Slim, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. It's a sunny, nice day.
Oh, what a wonderful October day!
Yeah,
again, Canada!
We got our second summer. Let's go.
I don't know that I technically call this summer, but it'll do.
Yeah, it's pleasantly warm considering it's October.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so today's topic of conversation, or the theme of the conversation, of course, which we don't ever completely stick to. So wandering in conversation, not excluded. We are going to be talking today about attachment, codependency, interdependence, and interconnectedness. And we're going to look at these things from a couple of perspectives. So we'll start with these perspectives will include like an Eastern view and a Western view, at least as in terms of the way it's defined in dictionaries, right? So this is basically where we're headed in the course of conversation. And again, I find that like it's the kind of stuff that most people don't talk about, but it's usually a large part of their life that they're completely oblivious to, right? So again, it's for the sake of bringing it to people's attention, we're having this conversation. Bless you. Shit.
No.
So we'll start with attachment. So the dictionary defines attachment as affection, fondness, or sympathy for someone or something, right? So is that before myself reading the definition? Is that how you understood it?
Yeah, I would say that's concise.
All right, and just if you're curious, which dictionary? It's the Oxford Dictionary. So there is an attachment theory, which I guess it's just slightly removed from the definition of attachment itself, but it states that. The belief in a spiritual figure is similar as the attachment that children have with their parents. So it's the psychology of religion, and research explores the ways that a belief in God can fulfill the criteria of an attachment figure. So I'm not picking on religions, just to be clear. I'm just saying that, just illustrating or pointing out that it functions, that your connection to your religion functions like an attachment, right? So it's all attachments are contextual. I would go so far as to say in that they can be negative or they can be positive, and it's really dependent on the degree of your attachment and where it's placed. But what you'll typically find is that it's actually it's not entirely beneficial, right? Like there's a little bit of benefit from it, but it's mostly unhealthy, right? When we talk in terms of psychology, when they talk about attachment, right? You got any feelings on that?
I think it's going to be very good looking at healthy attachment versus non-healthy, because the juxtaposition, just comparing how different they are, it really shows like the meaningful difference. Okay,
so again, to be fair, this idea of attachment is often seen in a negative light because it's often associated with a codependency. So
Right.
familiar with codependency?
Yeah, in my opinion, I think most people see it that way. Like
Right. Yeah.
attachment
Yeah.
is
That
inherently
would be fair. Yeah.
codependence.
Like that's probably the common way to look at, or the common interpretation when somebody uses the word attachment, right? That it's a codependency, and codependency is actually a psychological condition. A person of low self-esteem, with strong desire for approval and acknowledgement, develops unhealthy attachments to either people or places, uh, for their own needs, right? And in a strange way, it's exploitive. That it's the person exploiting themselves, right? And it has to. It typically it's associated with a lot of excessive emotion or psychological reliance on a partner, right? So it kind of it kind of parallels like debilitating illness or addiction in that like that, which in those cases you might understand because there's this other factor that's impacting the individual. But there's people who don't suffer or aren't suffering from, say, a terminal illness or have addiction issues, and who it's understandable that they be codependent. But there are people without that. All they're craving is, they want acknowledgement and approval, and they seek it typically in other people, right? So codependent people or people who have attachments to other people. Um, they're willing to make extreme personal sacrifices on behalf of whatever the focus of their attachment is, right? Right. So just so that they can feel good. So codependent person will neglect themselves to please their partner. Being needed by another person is necessary for a sense of purpose for them. So the relationship, one or both parties can be codependent. So you can be in a relationship where both of the parties in the relationship are codependent. So talk about a negative feeding a negative, right?
Right.
But in a strange way, it actually might balance the two of them out, right? Because they have something to cling to. They cling to each other, and then but because they have that and they're dependent on each other that way, it kind of levels them out and allows for them to be functional. Although, I would go so far as to say that would be a horrible way to have a relationship with somebody, right?
Yeah, you say functional. That's
Well, it just means that they can have a job, they can pay their rent, they
Right.
can, feed themselves.
right. A
Like,
functioning alcoholic is still alcoholic.
right.
It's a problem.
So codependency. So to make sure that I'm perfectly clear, codependency is not a good thing.
Right.
Although, like I said, there's people who are functional and probably live whole lives in a state of that codependency. You ever experienced anything like that yourself?
Oh yeah, no. Codependency is such a common issue, especially now that the way in which we, I guess, organize and communicate through social media, that changed it like drastically within my own lifetime.
Yeah. Again, the internet, social media, all these things are relatively new. The internet, like wide use of it's only been around for about 25 years. Social media and that sort of stuff, maybe the last 15 years.
Yeah, people my age, it seems like we outsource all of our critical thinking, we outsource all of our personal beliefs. It seems like for the most part, we are highly educated and conditioned to a specific thing, like this. You speak about how the automatic nerve system, autonomic nerve
Autonomic,
system,
yeah. And you're right to use the word automatic. That's all it means, autonomic.
but it's the overstimulus. It's the ADHD type brain. Like we're developing that intentionally as a community.
Well, as a result of the development of the technology and the directions that it's gone into. So then,
Right.
so
I
then,
say intentional. I'm
yeah.
wrong to say intentional. I'm just saying like you throw an iPad at a person and you let them stay with that their whole lives.
It has an effect on them, and
Yeah.
and one that didn't exist 100 years ago, right? So people connected. We're going to get into interconnectedness. That's further down the conversation, but to just to say it very quickly, that people experience connection through other people and through the interaction with the natural world 100 years ago. There was no benefit of social media, and when you think about codependency, right? You can become codependent not exactly with a person, but with the technology itself. So you become dependent. You're codependent on your social media, because what are you seeking? Approval and acknowledgement. And so then it's the quickest way to get it, right? Whereas traditionally, when pre-internet, you wanted approval, acknowledgement, it was usually based on either how poorly you behaved and how bad you and the worst things that you could do, or how well you performed, right? So that would earn you acknowledgement, approval. So it would go both ways. So good and bad you could have the benefit of those experiences, but it was largely determinant on your efforts, like in school or athletic performance. Those things would garner you approval and acknowledgement, right?
Right. It's not necessarily meritocracy, but merit is the function. Like nowadays, it seems like the ability to identify with a group or the ability to promote a certain facade, like image.
That's right. So social media, what social media has done is train people to be dishonest about who they are and disingenuous. So they'll present, and at least in the social media, in a very particular way, whereas their life doesn't live up to the image that they've created. And think about take it a step further, and think about what dating apps have done.
Oh God, yeah.
And when I was in my 20s, a very, very long time ago, you had to go where people congregated and in the hopes of meeting people. So, as strange as it may sound, malls, grocery stores, gyms, which kind of makes sense. I remember in my 20s that the reference to working at a gym or going to a gym was that it was a meat market, because people would go there to meet people. And I used to laugh because, you get all the hardcore grungy workout people, so you could tell that they were serious about working out, and then everybody else would look the best that they could look while they're working out, again, because they're trying to get someone's attention. So it's not that it didn't exist. The point I'm trying to make is not that it didn't exist before social media and dating apps and that sort of thing, but the degree to which people did it still forced them to interact in a very direct way, like a physical way. You weren't removed by a phone or the internet, so that you're not even seeing them. And I dare say, isn't video calling something that your generation frowns on?
For some reason, yes.
Yeah, you guys just prefer to text each other?
Well, for a large portion of people, it seems like typically females, they'll do video call and talk to their girlfriends, but for men it's like you're on an app and you're doing voice calls. At best you're sharing a screen like you're playing a game.
Yeah.
I would say that dating apps themselves, it's one of the many things that have changed, but it still is kind of the same. Like you're still doing the same activities. It's just that now it's like you fail at an extremely faster rate, or you succeed at an extremely faster rate, and part of that affects our psychology in a way we're not prepared for.
Yeah, I think it's a fair statement to make that we have no idea what the long-term implications are of social media and the internet.
On dating apps, I've gotten ridiculous messages, and I'm like, you understand, I'm a human being, you don't just act like this.
Wow.
People are so removed.
Oh well, because they don't fear any kind of reprisal for poor behavior, right? Where in my day, when I was in my 20s, you would immediately get called out. If you're behaving like an ass, people would tell you, you're behaving like an ass, stop that, right? So acceptable social behavior, we kind of monitored ourselves, right? So somebody behaving like an idiot, they'd get called out for being an idiot. Now the idiots can hide behind their screen. And remember, in my day, the consequence of you being an idiot or deciding that you're going to run your mouth, it could lead to a physical confrontation. And I'm not talking about like, death match or anything like that.
Right.
I just mean that like hostile intent and maybe the trading of a few blows, and then everybody would back off.
Right, like it would be proportional.
Yeah,
Now it's like, oh, all of my issues, you got to deal with them.
Yeah,
It's
like
strange.
it's like, and this is the argument that I often make on the channel, right? That self-mastery, and most of the idiots who hide behind the convenience of the screen think that they're safe. You're not, you fucking moron. You're gonna out yourself at probably the most inopportune moment, and you're not gonna be able to backpedal your way out of it.
That actually is reminded me of something. Speaking as a man behind the screen, same as last time we recorded, I accidentally let the screen lock, so it will continue to record right now.
You locked yourself out?
Yep.
Okay, let me just correct that. It's okay. I'm just gonna need a moment. We can still keep talking. So, again, right? The failure of technology. You'd think that you'd think by now that sorry about that. You'd think by now it would be the kind of thing that wouldn't be an issue. And it's all good. It's like at the end of the day, I don't know. Does it take away from the content? Probably not. Like,
Actually, let's talk about specifically what just happened.
Sure.
I felt insecure because I was not doing my job properly. I was supposed to pay attention to the screen.
Yeah, it's okay. But that
Usually I'm looking at your face because you're right here.
but we should make allowances for human failing.
Right.
Like that's how we are designed to learn. We make a mistake, and then you take a lesson from that mistake, so that as to not to have to repeat that. Boy, was that loud! As to not repeat the mistake again at some future time. And the likelihood is you'll probably make the mistake a few times before it self-corrects.
Yeah.
And again, it's perfectly understandable. We're not kind enough with each other, and we come with all these unrealistic expectations of others, and when they fail, then we lambaste them, we go after them hard, and then the person who's doing that, what they're fearing is that that's going to be done to them, right?
That's the thing. I was talking to the new neighbor recently. We're just talking about how insecurity seems to be the root of some of these issues. Like, you really think about it, like we're all stupid monkeys and we all love each other for it, but we don't like each other's actions. But that's because our actions aren't representative of like internal feelings, internal desires.
Right.
We're monkeys.
Yeah, I agree. So I think that hairless monkeys might be more
beautiful,
accurate.
awesome hairless monkeys.
Yeah, I think the failure is that we don't value honesty or the expression transparency, which means that you're being genuine. Like, we all understand that we're prone to making errors, and that we're not exactly perfect in the pursuit of relationships. And I think the internet amplifies that anxiety you might have about yourself that might be unfair, like, because the way it amplifies it might take like an anthill and turn it into a mountain. It makes more out of something that's maybe not necessarily a problem, but because you have this level of expectation, now you amplify that own personal problem for yourself.
Absolutely. Like,
Right.
I like looking at a bunch of different videos for information. One sort of channel I watch is CPAC, which is Canadian Parliament something committee. Like,
Right.
government officials speaking on government official topics. It was some of the most stressing stuff I've ever seen, and I can't do anything about it.
Maybe stop watching.
Right. But perfect example of like how the internet's a huge benefit, but you really got to take it in moderation.
Or, so what's the old adage? You take it with a grain of salt, right? Like, you take everything with a grain of salt. And I think you can't treat this stuff as being real. It's real in the manner of speaking that we experience it, but in and of itself, it's not real. It's ideas manifested like that we've breathed life into and we've shaped our societies around, but they're just ideas.
Yeah, people don't like when they review things. I've noticed people don't disattach that animating figure like the concept, like, oh, this institution does this, this, and that. And it's like, yes, but tomorrow, if everybody went home, it's brick and mortar.
Right. I think it's too like the complexity of the way that we interact, and that um, how thoughtless we are in that interaction, right? Because words are a motherfucker. So I can't remember who said that, but you can do so much damage to somebody, especially somebody who's early in their development. Oh wow, your car needs work. Someone early in their development, that that kind of hostile use of language can be crippling, and then create all sorts of issues. Never mind the fucking assholes who fucking chain their kid to their bed and put duct tape over their mouth because the child's being a fucking child and they're incapable of fucking addressing their child in a mature, meaningful way. So again, that one's an extreme, but you you would think that because of the nature of what we are, and because we are transient, whatever this experience is, we're all of us are only here temporarily. Isn't that what the transhumanists are trying to resist? But because it's we're here temporarily, you would think we'd be kinder to each other, but we don't. Because and the reason we don't is because you're trained to only give a shit about yourself. So then, why the fuck would you give a shit about like whether or not you're going to inflict trauma, psychological trauma on your child or children or another adult for that fucking matter? Like, this is the failure. This is our complete failure. And now this is a time of transition. So it's not hopeless, and I'm optimistic that we'll kind of grow into it, that we'll figure it the fuck out, but only because we're willing to have the conversation. You're capable of talking about this or unwilling to talk about this, get used to it. It won't get better, it'll get worse. So the only way to kind of manage all of this in ourselves is by being able to have the conversations with regards to this very topic.
Yeah, I always think that the antidote comes from the poison. Like, you think of Friar Lawrence in Romeo and Juliet. He says the root, or the top of the plant, whatever, heals. The other side is poison.
Right.
I think he's speaking about hemlock. We are seeing some of the most drastic instabilities in, like, perspective. Not like mental illness. I'm speaking specifically perspective.
Right. So it's the way we view ourselves. It's not. It might be fair to say that it's not a deficit in mental function. It's the perspective we take on what we are. So it's an idea, and we get in. So the idea acts like a virus, and it affects our capacity to think. And how, and you might be asking, how does it affect? By instilling you with biases that will act as a tool of division between you and everyone else. So then it'll produce feelings of isolation, it'll fucking, and aggression towards others, because you don't see them as yourself. You just see them as the opposition.
Right. There's so much interesting stuff to speak about that on, but I was thinking, I lost it. Continue. Sorry. I had a moment ago. Oh, this is it. So creative people typically have temperament that seems to be more feminine. I say feminine, but it's just behavioral.
Right.
Anywho, people who tend to be more creative also have a harder time within their own head, like, making solid categories. Like, we're categorical animals, we think in categories, especially in the society. However, creative people do not have that so much. They think abstractly. So a brick is a shoe, it's a weapon, it's a part of a house, it's like 20 different things, whereas regular people see it's only 5 things. By being open, you have to inherently go, what I'm seeing is not all it is. And that openness is something that I'm seeing among everybody, and it may have to do with mental illness, may have to do with perspective.
But it might not. This is the thing. It may not actually be a mental illness. It might be the result
Right.
of a perspective that's heavy in bias. So then it's not that there's a mental or psychological deficit. What there is a failure on the individual's part to gain a healthy perspective, right? And again, I've discussed this at length, but as far as I understand, the only way to get a healthy perspective is to be present in the current moment or to pay attention. And the only way to train your nervous system, so everything else is leading up to this point in your life has trained you to favor biases of one kind or another. So the only way to offset that is you have to recondition the nervous system and the psychology, which requires then meditation. Because it's the only tool that I'm aware of that does that. Right? So, and again, so for any of you naysayers, fuck you, man. So, sorry, I digress.
So, if I can add to that,
sure.
I have my own immature moment. So, out of frustration, which is a ethereal, it's in one moment, gone the next. In that moment, I was feeling extreme frustration. Like the stupid monkey I am, I punched the floor, I punched it wrong, I broke my hand. So, I now have a month and a half long issue from a transcendental, ethereal.
A transient moment, a moment that was just that, or rather an emotional. Because remember, the way that works, the trigger might be words, and then you make an emotional association to the word. So, because you might have like a rich experience with whatever the trigger is.
Which frustration is? It's not anger; it's frustration.
Right. Well, which is a form in itself is a form of anger, right?
Yes.
It's the preamble to getting angry, right? So, and so out of frustration, you lash out.
Right.
So that's an emotionally immature reaction. And the key word there is reaction. It's you reacting to the way you've been triggered. But to be fair, your own biology and physiology and psychology are all driving the punch in the floor. So what I mean by that is that then if the state of mind creates an emotional connection or association with whatever the trigger was, and that induces an intense emotional response, then what your body craves is it craves an energetic rush. And what could be more energetic than epinephrine and norepinephrine?
I felt better.
Fancy words for adrenaline rush to kick in that allow for you to do that, and then would drive your behavior. It drives the behavior. So it's a reaction, which after the fact, yeah, you felt good psychologically, but here's the trap. Now, every time you encounter a situation, you're prone to repeating the exact same behaviors. Right. So it demonstrates not only just immaturity, but a lack of understanding of our own habitual patterns. And we're talking about attachment. Well, what could be more habitual than the association or the attachment you have to either another person or a place or a thing?
Well, specifically, I was upset about the lack of change. So feeling that there was no change and that I'm incompetent to help that, like there's nothing I could do to change the world, hypothetically speaking. Breaking my hand definitely didn't help.
No, but in terms of changing the world and helping your hand, you could condition yourself, because remember, you're getting hijacked by all this shit.
Well, right.
So in principle, you can use that, the way it functions, to produce the opposite effect. So part of the poison is the solution, the resolution to the poison. Yeah, isn't that what you said? You're
Friar
quoting.
Lawrence said he's a lot smarter than me.
All right. So that should demonstrate then to people that they have the capacity. Then, no matter how extreme and extremely negative their behavior is, they have the capacity to cultivate an extremely positive habitual patterns of behavior. So you don't have to be trapped, right? Like, you're only trapped so long as you feel trapped, right? It's just a feeling. But if you treat the feeling as that it has the utmost value and it's of the utmost importance, then all you're doing is building a stronger trap, and the outcome from that will be like, you know, really negative habitual patterns of behavior. So again, using that same function, you could liberate yourself and start to experience, you know, extremely positive habitual patterns of behavior that are healthy, and then allow for you to feel good about yourself, right?
Yeah, you can bias your own system. Like we
Well,
talk about biohacking a lot.
well, okay, but you know, honestly, in this age of advancing technology,
Yeah.
and like, this seems like the most reasonable recourse to all of this stuff is then for people to take control of their own lives, right? And how do you? And the question then becomes, well, how do you do that? Well, you have to dress yourself as like the real Holy Trinity, mind, body, and spirit, and then you figure out what those things are, and you figure out how to train those things for your own benefit, to advance yourself. So instead of fucking being like the transhumanists, they want to like to download their consciousness or have an immortal body, you can in a very strange way, you can achieve something to a degree of what they want, just by biohacking your own natural psychology, biology, and physiology.
For the transhumans, I think it's a lot of just uncomfortable with their current situation or something along the lines of they're scared of the limitation of our physiology.
Or they might be, what it would be maybe more honest to say that they might be absolute terrified at the idea of death and dying.
So their decision is, I'm going to become something not human. I'm going to become something
so I
more
can be immortal, so I don't have to die. And I'm like, do you understand that death gives you perspective on life? So if you're reacting to the reality that we're all going to die out of fear, it'll produce the craziest behaviors to avoid that natural outcome.
Yeah, this hits on a topic I've been trying to find words for like a month. Why are people so scared of death, but their whole reaction is, oh, since I'm scared of death, I'm going to waste my life. It's like, you're scared of life now. Like, what are you doing?
It's because the fear infects everything. So if you can't cultivate the perspective where you're accepting of the reality of the reality that you're living in, or that you're having an experience of, and that's part of it, then that fear, you only cultivate greater fear, right? So remember, we just finished talking about this, that you're training yourself to favor being afraid, so your bias becomes fear.
Right, in broader terms, like you said a million times, subjectivity feeds subjectivity.
That's right. So, and it's not that there's no getting rid of that shit. It's like there's no getting rid of your ego. There's not. What you do is you change the nature of your relationship to it, so you have a different perspective on what those things are, and then you no longer allow for them to influence your behavior. So, even the most advanced and most mature individuals still experience those things, but those things don't exercise influence or control over the individual. And that's ultimately what we're talking about, that you can get to a place where you're going to have those experiences, and you'll treat them, well, incidentally, because you recognize what they are. They're transient. They're not meant to last. But then, you get hooked, addicted to yourself, and you go to your way to keep repeating that shit because you want the adrenaline rush. Right? Sorry, you're gonna say.
I was just going to interject. I would argue that it's definitely an influence, but it's not like an influence you need to react on.
You can just have
Awareness of it.
a degree of awareness of it, and not allow for it to influence your behavior. You just you suddenly have the recognition, hey, I'm feeling this, and then in that recognition, you actually minimize the amount of influence it has. If you allow yourself to get caught up in it, it amplifies itself, because now it gets compounded further by your physiology, more emotional content, and then it drives you, well, mad.
It's funny because you can apply different biohacking to get this grateful, like, feeling of abundance. All of a sudden, however depressed you were, the magnitude of that, you can find it eventually, but positive. It sounds strange, but
Yeah,
we get ourselves where we want.
so the principle of like these habitual patterns of behavior and all this negative stuff, you can use that very same principle, but for cultivating like a more positive attitude, to express greater degrees of gratitude and have a greater degrees of appreciation, and then in the result of that, you're expending that energy and doing that, the likelihood is you'll experience things like joy and happiness more frequently. But there are states that are not, again, that are meant to be transient. You shouldn't get so attached to being happy that now you'll do anything to just constantly feel like you're happy.
So that's a dependent on emotion.
So again, a codependency, right? So codependency works its way out in us, and attachment. So and again, for the sake of this conversation, you can use them interchangeably, because ultimately it's the same thing, that it's at work, and it impacts us in the worst ways imaginable, and then we can't break with it because we don't understand how it works. And like I said, there is a way to undo it, right? But nobody wants to do the work. You were okay with people force feeding you shit your whole life, from the society you live in, your social circumstances, your economics, your education, all that stuff, feeding your biases that you never stop long enough to consider the fact that, oh, this might all be having a negative effect. You experience a negative effect, but you can't put your finger on why they exist and why you experience them, when you go like, it's a result of everything in your environment, everything you're exposed to. So then you have to offer what you then are required to sort of offer, to have a counterbalance to all the impacts of all that shit. So, and again, the only method I'm aware of that does that is meditation, right? So you can make whatever argument you want, but that's ultimately the way to liberate yourself.
I think I remember hearing from like Eastern traditions you brought before.
We're going to jump into them in a little bit too.
Oh, I was going to say, like, there's this concept of duality, and like there's no one thing, everything's connected in some sense. I think our emotions function exactly like that.
Yeah,
like, there's a network we can
they're
work
completely impermanent. Like, so you shouldn't treat them like they're permanent.
Yeah, like you say about comfort all the time.
Well, my bias is to have no bias, and I seek discomfort as opposed to comfort. Don't misunderstand. I like creature comforts, but I know when to put myself in a position where I'm not comfortable, because it forces me to grow.
Right, it's a skill.
Right, and so I favor. It took me decades to figure this shit out, but so I favor things that challenge everything that I think I know, and I seek out things that make me feel awkward and uncomfortable, because then it forces me to address that and deal with it. And so, and remember, like anything else, the more you do that, the better you get at it, and then you eventually get to a point where you don't give it a second thought, right? Yeah. So anyway, having said that, I want to get into symptoms of codependency. All right, so, and I'm sure that you'll find that it's not exclusive to codependency. Things like low self-esteem, people-pleasing behaviors, rather, difficulty in setting boundaries, caretaking, and just general dependency, right? Those kind of things debilitate you in terms of your ability to grow and to realize more of who you are. And remember, ultimately, you're just potential that's largely that's unlimited, that's largely unrealized. So you could have the capacity of of realizing yourself in your entirety, but that for most of us, it's not the focus, because the training that we experience in the life that we live within society conditions you to be self-interested, to consume and compete, and favors those behaviors. So in those behaviors, you're not gonna sit there and go, oh shit, I need to evolve as a human being. You're just gonna be you're gonna be too caught up in the pursuit of the things that you think you're supposed to be doing.
Right, like you have a competition with yourself instead of the world. Like one thing I see is like some people have this mentality where they have to be so helpful they'll destroy their own bodies. That's not helpful.
Yeah, it's very, again, it's very, very temporary, right? So one of the other things too that you'll find amongst codependent persons is they typically will act submissively and behave in a way that you could be described as needy, clingy, and all of that is to the serves the end of them being able to manipulate others to get what they want, right? Which is to feel secure in a relationship. So they'll use those things to try and create a false sense of like security.
Yeah, the best friend you have is probably going to be somebody who's on your side, but also an asshole. Like they're not afraid to go, hey, listen, I'm going to risk our friendship because I think you're shooting yourself in the foot.
But they'll do it to your face.
Exactly.
Right? So I don't understand this, how it's so frequently we assassinate each other's characters behind each other's backs, when to me the greatest value is somebody will call me out and say you're a fucking asshole, right? That kind of honesty I value with the highest regard. So you're not doing me any favors by lying to me to protect my feelings.
Yeah, worst case scenario, somebody says you need a haircut, blah blah blah.
Well, whatever it might be, but if you think that you lying to protect my feelings, no matter how painful the truth is, you're not doing anyone any favors, right? And this is how we self-correct. Like you sit there and the people that you value, that you interact with, and if they see shortcomings or see something is problematic in you and they point it out to you, they're not trying to hurt you. As painful as that truth may be, what they're trying to do is like help you along, right? So again, it's the importance of being real upfront with each other, which most of us don't know how to do. But we love to talk about each other behind each other's back, though. Like,
yeah, I think Nietzsche was the guy who said, I'm paraphrasing. Roughly most, no, he didn't say roughly most people. He said most people that project this air of like, oh, I'm good, I'm nice. I'm nice. It's like, okay, are you nice or are you sacrificing what you need to say in order to be perceived as
right? So they're more interested in the way they're perceived, the perception of themselves, right? Again, it's a tool of manipulation, right? So it's like being clingy and needy.
What's wrong with being wrong and stupid?
Yeah,
just grow from it.
I dare say you're better served by reveling in your own shortcomings and stupidity. That's how you undo those things, and then you undo those only to discover that guess what? You probably have more. So, and again, the point is to try and evolve past whatever it is, whatever limitations that you imagine that you have, and that maybe that's the whole point of life, right? So a well-lived life is one where you evolve. You're not the same person at 20 that you are at 75. And if you are the same person, that means for 75 years you've been living the same day of every year for 75 years. That's not a life, right?
I believe
you're trapped.
I believe we're supposed to be adventurers, experiencers. Like the whole point is to be present in experience, because we only have this time in the moment.
Right. We only and our time is always short. We always imagine that there's more time. I can do it tomorrow. The fact of the matter is, none of us. We're all gonna shuffle off this mortal coil. None of us get to know when. We only know that it's going to happen, and you don't get to know how. So a large part of it is a mystery. So why would you waste whatever time you have here on self-grandizement when you could have like potent relationships with other human beings, that you could have fantastic interactions, as opposed to like living like a spoiled child, who's only interested in their wants and needs. Right? There's no value in that. You end up living a life that's unsatisfying, unrewarding, because there's no achievement, there's no accomplishment, there's no growth. Right? So that ultimately becomes like a fail.
Right. Like I do a volunteer experience. It's a convention for comic books locally. I've been there 10 years. I initially started just to get my community hours for high school. It's 10 years later because I didn't expect it, but I found something there. Even though I'm not so like headstrong into comic books themselves, I like theology and stories. I found so much of myself in the volunteer experience. People keep saying, "Oh, you're doing it for free. You're doing it for free." Yeah, but I'm actually living fucking life. It's better than just going home and being sad.
Have you ever heard the expression, "Is better to give than to receive"?
Oh, no. I got so much out of the experience.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So you give of yourself freely, without any expectation of receiving anything for your efforts. And so then the effort becomes its own reward.
Yeah. No, I've grown so much in skills alone.
Yeah, again,
Like there's community too.
what you're saying, I've heard so many other people say, right? Especially who, typically it's because they're giving of themselves freely to help others who are, maybe perhaps in a more disadvantaged place.
Right.
And so in doing that and in that help, they're making a difference in other people's lives, right? And so that's satisfying. It makes you feel good, right? And ultimately, that's an important experience to have, to feel good about yourself and the things that you're doing.
Yeah, it's strange. I feel like people aren't ready to help themselves, but helping others, it seems like because it justifies their existence to others, that's why they do it.
Well,
justify it to yourself.
Well, but by helping others too, then assisting others becomes a focus, and then you're not hyper focused on your life and your tragedy and your and the things that are going on within your existence. So suddenly your subjective view of yourself is removed, and now you're coming at life in a more objective way. Hey, how can I help you? And in that, like I say, it alleviates your suffering.
Right. That's with honest help, though. There's a lot of people who might be considered like useful idiots, where their emotions are pimped out in order for somebody else's cause, and it's like,
well, they're seeking to gain favor so they offer up favors. So it's, to them, it's a transaction. It's an exchange. Here, I do this for you. You're going to do this for me.
I see this in advocacy a lot. It's like, I'm a good person. I support this. And it's like, okay, you've done nothing but yell how you support this thing. And because of it, you're a good person. Because of doing no actual work but screaming, you're a good person. I've always found that strange.
Well, it shouldn't be surprised. In terms of like the kind of habitual patterns of behavior that manifest as a result of like a very selfish perspective in terms of life and how you should live it, right? Like all that stuff is a direct result of all that negativity, right? I want to talk about Buddhism, but the Buddhist view on attachment, right? So I don't mean to switch gears, but again, this relates to the idea of attachment or codependency. Now, in Sanskrit, it's the Buddhist view of attachment is referred to as upadana. I think I'm saying that right. Upadana. And it refers to people grasping or clinging to other people, objects, ideas, or experiences, right? And they cling to false views, including the idea of being separate and the idea of a permanent self. So you could view the transhumanists who are seeking some form of permanence as people who are suffering from attachment, and they could simply liberate themselves from it, but that's not enough. Won't bring them peace of mind because they're so worked up in the attachment. Remember, the Buddhist view is that you can be attached to anything, people, objects, ideas, or experiences. So that's the struggle. So attachment to desire is the root of our suffering. So you desire something, so it becomes a driving force behind suffering. But having said that, desire itself is not necessarily the problem. It's healthy to desire things. It's part of what you are. And again, you're not eliminating that. You just change the nature of your relationship. You change the nature of your relationship to your desire. That you just see it that, hey, I want something, but again, it's not meaningful. It's not. I'm not supposed to be driven to manifest that desire. If it presents itself, it's great. Then you take advantage of that. But the view is really skewed, right? You're gonna say something?
Oh yeah, no, it's so funny. Like, I think it's part of our biology. We are somewhat immature because when we have that deep, deep desire, we need this, I want this. The anger comes from the feeling of like incompetence to have it, like you can't get it or you don't have it yet. Like these issues come from this feeling of like, oh no, the desire is a need.
Well, again, I'm going to reiterate.
It's helpful when you need food.
Yeah, because we need to make the distinction. Desire is not the problem, but when you closely associate with your desire,
yes,
right, which is attachment,
like the ego,
right? Well, no, it's like that. It's more than that. Like, so you think of like that, whatever it may be, that you're hyper focused on it, then your inability to acquire it will lead to some form of suffering. So you could be liberated from it by just having a healthy perspective on desire, that it's okay to desire things, but not to the point where now you're going to expend every effort to make it happen, and at the expense of yourself, like, because that's the critical part. Like, it's at the expense of something.
Right? You can't beat yourself up for not being perfect at something the first time,
or or that you couldn't achieve your desire, which is like you wanted a beautiful woman, or unlimited cash flow or whatever. You can. It's okay to desire those things. It's not okay to obsess over them, right? So desire, again, in and of itself, desiring somebody in your life, desiring material gain and reward, isn't a problem. It becomes a problem when now you alter your behaviors to achieve it. So you'll do dishonest and disreputable things to achieve those, right? And then you spend all your time like, second guessing yourself, or creating anxiety around what you're doing. That's suffering, and you don't have to suffer over these things.
Throughout the process of becoming more competent, it's reflected in your emotions too. The only thing these biases do is keep you in the rut, keep you going, oh, I can't, for example, I can't play video games, I'm not good at video games. Well, why is that? Well, I'm just not that good at it. Have you attempted it?
Well,
have you repeatedly attempted
the example's not bad, but it might be better to say that you play video games, and now your desire is you want to become paid for it, and you want to be like a world-class video game player because that's a thing now, right? Like, so, and again, like any kind of specialized pursuit, there's some of us who are more natural at it and whose timing is really good, and then they receive all the rewards for being exceptional at it, and then, but you're not. You're a basement. Your guy hangs out in the basement playing your video games, and your desire is to be a world-class competitor, but you're not. But now you have anxiety over the fact, or that you're not there, and you keep fueling it by going, I'm good enough to compete. Why can't I do that? that's you not facing the reality of your situation, that like you just aren't, right? And if you were as competent as you think you are, that you might have made inroads into doing that, into playing or into playing video games in a professional capacity, so that you can derive an income.
Right. So the volunteer experience I was talking about before, that was something I just kind of meandered into. Like it wasn't intentional. Now I'm 10 years later. I'm like one of the most senior staff there because I've been there for 10 damn years. I'm still a young guy. These these drastic changes take time. I think people want answers suddenly.
Well, because everybody wants what they want right here and right now.
Right.
They're not, again, and that's an unhealthy, unrealistic way of looking at shit.
Especially if they don't approach the thing.
Right. That the most things do require some kind of time, and you don't. And it doesn't just drop in your lap. If it manifests, it's a result of like all the efforts that you make to get to a place where you can, where that's going to be the outcome. But most of us just want it without the work, right? And again, an enormous failing, and I see it. I see it in a lot of the 20-somethings today, where they just want the reward without the effort, and it doesn't work that way. You're required, at least on some level, to make an effort, and sometimes it might be a monumental effort that you're required to make. Like it's all dependent on whatever it is that you might actively be pursuing, right? So this whole idea of like getting trapped or attached or codependent on the way you see things, it's ideas that enslave you, right? So ideas can liberate you too. So it's the real question is which ideas are you actively pursuing, right? If any, right?
That's true.
Right. So
I think most people follow their emotions, not their
right.
Like we assume we're thinking creatures, but half the time, all that thinking is just. I'm not going to say it's like moot, but it's eroded by these emotions that direct you in a bad way.
Right. So it's driven by. So all that thinking is driven heavily by bias. So you can, in this case, you mentioned emotions. Well, emotions foster bias. So do intellectual concepts and ideas, right? From political ones to religious ones, all that stuff feeds into your biases or your subjective view of yourself and reality. And again, you don't have to be trapped by those, right? So I think it might be interesting to talk about impermanence, right? Which is the state or fact of lasting for only a limited period of time, right? So we alluded to this a little bit earlier, but the transhumanists, they're looking for permanence. And when you, from the broadest perspective, you look at this reality we're experiencing and participating in, and do you ever get the impression that anything about it is permanent? The whole thing is transitory. And so that therefore it's impermanent, and it's heading. Here's the weird thing, and then it's heading somewhere, right? Like to a conclusion of one kind or of another. And in our case, like the ultimate conclusion is death. And there's those who are so terrified by the notion of their own impermanence, and they're fueled by their own emotions, that now they're trying to actively seek a way out, right? Which, and again, I go that to me might be questionable, right?
Everything we have is impermanent. Do you think, like the brick behind you, 100 years old, easily? My question is that going to be here in 2,000 years? Absolutely not.
No, it'll be dust.
But it looks permanent. Like,
well,
you can't tell me this isn't solid.
Again, part of the illusion of the reality.
Right.
Like, so as illusory as it is, you experience it in a very real way.
Right.
That's solid. That's not going nowhere. Or at least that's the appearance. But remember, it's only the appearance. Given enough time, it'll be reduced to a pile of dust, right? So it's us overlooking because of our biases, we're unwilling to see things for what they are. We
Right.
rather see them for what we want them to be.
I agree. I feel like most people had a moment where they saw into reality a bit more and they understood, um, like you say, just like how impermanent it is. I think most people would be very concerned all of a sudden. They would have to like look at things they've been avoiding for their whole lives.
Well, but here's the thing: all the stuff that you're avoiding, if you were accepting of it, it would no longer represent an issue, right? That you'd be able to have a full existence outside of it, right? That you don't have to suffer as a result of it. So, and speaking of that, because what we're talking about is how do you address attachment? How do you dissolve attachments, right? Because our codependencies, or this view or this desire for permanence in an impermanent reality or universe, right? That that acceptance is a big part of it. And in the Buddhist terms, it refers to our ability to stay present. That's how they view acceptance. So in the context, the Western context, we have the inability of being present, because what are we doing? Spending all of our time thinking about the past or projecting on the future. So then that's at the expense of the current moment.
We are wonderful consumers.
Aren't we? So and it's funny, when you're accepting, it's the action of consenting to receive or undertake something offered, right? So this reality that you are presented with, you can either accept it as it is or spend your entire life trying to demand it to fit what you desire or what you expect or what you want, right? And it again doesn't necessarily have to be true, right? And so the actual mechanical way of cultivating acceptance, remember, in the Buddhist, as the way the Buddhists view it, it's staying present. So meditation, we did already discuss it, but it's worth mentioning again, that it's simply the ability to sit still and pay attention to the present moment. And then it has profound reaches. It has a dramatic effect on our nervous system, our psychology, and our biology. And although it's becoming more accepted and popular, for a long time it was just viewed as like, well, just nonsense, right?
To be fair, when somebody says, listen, sit down and breathe a bunch of times, it's going to change your life, yeah, it kind of sounds crazy.
Well, that's because most of us take for granted that somehow we are breathing correctly, and most of us are breathing incorrectly. And there are studies, and science has gone a long way to sort of to define what a correct breathing is versus an incorrect breathing. And the majority of North Americans, particularly, are like, apical, mouth breathing, knuckle dragging, hairless gorillas, right?
Heel dragon too.
Right?
No, it's so awful calling somebody a knuckle dragger, but it's like
I've been a knuckle dragger.
No. I don't see it as a term of judgment that comes with like personal bias. It's just we have a whole culture of fucking mouth breathers, and not in the rude way, in the literal way.
Yeah, and because they do that, and because they breathe that way, here's the thing that most people don't understand. I've mentioned it before many times throughout the podcast we recorded, is that mouth breathing is panicked breathing. So it induces a panicked biological response, dumping of stress hormones. So the adrenaline rush, norepinephrine, epinephrine, cortisol, and all these things are working in a hugely negative capacity in your body, because you're constantly being bombarded by these stress hormones that don't play out well. They lead to all manifestation of problems, from mental health issues to physical health issues, right? Okay.
That's a whole podcast in and
Oh,
of itself.
don't worry, we're good there. we're gonna do it. We'll do it.
I genuinely didn't know how much our physiology changes because of our breathing. Like the shapes of our mouth, the alignment of our teeth, all these things are affected.
It impact. There's so much about ourselves. Like I said, we don't have an owner's manual as to how to operate this body that we live in. And part of this podcast, or the idea of biohacking, is figuring out what the owner's manual says, right?
Yeah, I tried to write a pamphlet when I was 16 on this is like a generalized theology you can follow. It's a narrative that it's a story, but it has meaning behind it. The more I got into it, the more I saw I was completely incapable to write even the first fucking sentence. It was insane. I had existential crisis for like a day or two.
I experienced that on the regular.
I mean, good. It shouldn't be a crisis, but it's worth addressing.
100%. One of the other ways to dissolve attachment, and we alluded to it when you were discussing about your volunteer work. It's compassion. In Sanskrit, that's karuna, and it's the wish that others be free from suffering. Right. So you were sympathetic, and we have pity and concern for the suffering and misfortune of others. Right. So even though that's not exactly what you're doing in volunteering, but it is a demonstration of compassion. And it's for us to you could interchangeably use the word consideration with compassion, right? You're concerned with the well-being of others, and if you were trained from an early age that should be your focus. So you should be focused more on helping your family, helping your friends, people close to you, without the expectation of reward for that effort, that you just make yourself available to them. And everybody came at life that way because you do it because we all share the same fate. Right? That then that perhaps maybe would be a kinder world, and we wouldn't have wars. Right? Because to me, might be the ultimate expression of a society or even a global society, where you eliminate war because what you do is you consider everyone else and you don't see them as being different from you. But remember, bias doesn't want that. And then those who are protecting their bias will argue about the practicality of them doing what they have to do. So it's dirty deeds done dirt cheap, or done in the defense of their biases, right? So
yeah, I've heard from people over and over and over again, oh, why don't you work in a soup kitchen? That's more helpful. Well, hey, I grew up on welfare. The nicest thing I can do for people like me growing up was we have a free event. Our intention is to keep it free forever. We have a system where we're able to pay off all the shit.
So then others can experience it. And as a break from however poor quality the life that they're living. I totally get it. So your intentions and your efforts are noble. I would say that that's wonderful that you actually are doing that.
I try to argue for myself so I don't have to feel like I'm just being a nice guy. I argue I'm doing it out of what's it called? Out of greed. I just want to see what I can do.
It's not greed.
I justify it that way.
Yeah, but it's compassion. It's consideration of others. It's concern for others. So and as a result of giving of yourself, you feel good. That's not greed. Right? That's some misuse of the word. Greed is bad. Yeah. Giving of yourself, good. Right?
I don't know. I just don't feel like it's so good for me to go oh, I'm a good person because of this.
You shouldn't outside of the podcast, if you don't discuss it, then you are a good person. You're not making it a focal point. Look at me, acknowledgement, approval. Look at me, I'm giving of myself to make all these poor
Yeah.
children growing up without any kind of material advantage, to give them the ability to escape for a free day, for an afternoon, or
To be fair, I
whatever.
just say it's free and that's nice. I
Well,
never include
okay,
my
but that's the point I'm trying to make.
yeah.
If you're not talking about it outside of the context of us, because you brought it up within the context of the podcast, you're just something you do, then you're giving of yourself freely. That's not an act of greed. That's that that's an act of consideration, that others are worthy of consideration, and then that's how you offer it to them, right?
I think that says more about me that I have to justify it as not being.
Well,
That's
it
weird.
might.
I'll think about it.
It might. Another way to dissolve attachments, or to address attachment, is interdependence, and it's the dependence of two or more people or things on each other. So we're not talking about taking advantage of each other. We're talking about mutual support of one another. So interdependence is you maintaining your autonomy while giving of yourself to support others, right? And you should always start with those closest to you, family, friends, and if everybody within that close knit community approach things in an interdependent kind of way, then you'd recognize the value of each other, and then you'd support each other while maintaining your own autonomy. That's the key part, right?
Yeah, like that's teamwork, 100%.
Exactly what the best way to sum it up, right? And because you'll accomplish more working together than working at odds with one another.
Yeah, I've had a great opportunity to see so many young people really give a shit, and that was amazing. Because like this one guy, gentle giant, he was like 6 feet tall, towering over me at like 15. So I'm looking up at him. I'm going, hey, good job, blah blah blah. He seemed like he was more than ecstatic before I said good job. He was already in that mode you're talking about.
Yeah. So again, you we can you as individuals you don't have to be trapped by codependency and attachment, but part of it is being able to recognize that you are codependent and attached, and then you know then there's a way to sort of uh, um, address that attachment and codependency, and just outlined like four of them, and this is not, again, it's a Buddhist idea, so it's the idea of expansiveness, right?
Yeah,
So, and expansiveness just means great size, right? But it's something that covers a large area. So expansiveness could be seen as the ultimate expression of like the combination of meditation, compassion, acceptance, and interdependence. That all those things lead to expansiveness. That you become large in your capacity, right? That you're able to give without limitation. And I think, and again, like if that's the ultimate outcome, then it completely neutralizes attachment and codependency, right? So the significance of an expansive mind into the Mahayana Buddhists, it emphasizes the mindset that is inclusive and open to all beings, right? It represents compassionate nature that characterizes like a giving teacher. So somebody like in a the teacher, somebody who just assists somebody else, and everybody at one point or another in the course of their life will fill the role of teacher and student. So it's you as a teacher, it's your ability to honor like that assistance to help elevate others, right? The importance of embracing it represents the importance of embracing all individuals with sympathy and understanding, right? And we talk very often about the importance of understanding, and again, worth repeating, and nobody would disagree with that, right? The expansive perspective fosters a sense of interconnectedness and compassion, right? So, I always make the argument that if you're compassionate, and you're meditative, and you're interdependent, and you're accepting, then it's what leads to expansiveness. But there's some who argue that expansiveness is what creates compassion, right? So I think they overlap really significantly. So I don't know that it's like the chicken or the egg, like which came first. And it doesn't matter which came first. The point is that if you have one, you have the other. Right?
Yeah.
Can't have one without the other.
I mean, absolutely. You can justify it either way. Like, emotions inflect on your perspective inflicts your emotions. Same with biology and psychology.
But it's because all those things are connected. There's a mind-body connection. You can't. We refer to the mind and body as separate things, but the reality is they're not. They're the same thing. They're wholly integrated. So again, you don't have one without the other. All right. So that in a nutshell is the way to address address and perhaps dissolve attachments. We had talked about dating apps earlier, and dating from when I was in my 20s to dating today, which leads to is this kind of interesting question about falling in love. And the Buddhists, we're going to run with this for a little bit, because again, it's only because it's a fascinating topic. So the Buddhist view of falling in love is that their view is love that involves clinging, lust, confusion, neediness, or fear, or grasping to self, is an expression of bondage and limitation, right? Codependency, right? So their view of love is that it's a codependent state. And when you look at romantic love,
right.
We're going to jump into this another time. We're going to address like different states of love, but this whole romantic chemistry between two individuals.
The obsessive love.
Well, it's just chemistry. Like you have some form of, you're not just attracted to each other. There's a sexual component to it, and that again, if it leads to you being clingy, obsessive, unhealthy, not good, right? And it's lustful and stuff. Those are negative. You don't. There's no benefit in that kind of love, right? And all the benefits that come from that codependency are usually short and temporary, right? So I guess you forgive the song lyrics, but take me to a higher love, right? Like that perhaps maybe that there is a greater way of love. And even though many would argue that compassion is a part of love or is a form of love, I agree that they overlap, but they can also be seen as different things, right? So the four kinds of love taught by Buddhists, for them, there's loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity, right? So their views of love are like I said, something that most of us probably don't spend the time to define what love might mean, and they go to the trouble of doing it. So loving kindness is kind of self-explanatory, right? And compassion, we already covered that, right? That it's concern and pity for others. Appreciative joy is feeling happy for others with appreciation and an unenvious attitude. That that when someone has a success, you're genuinely happy for them, right? So that's appreciative joy. And again, one of those things that we probably don't experience enough as individuals, right? But that would require you to see others as being no different than yourself.
I think that's a good place for people to start. Like, you lead by example, right? Like, if people around you aren't making the necessary changes, if you do, maybe they'll catch on.
Well, again, appreciative, like I said, appreciative joy to me is like this thing where, we could all experience more of it, and it's feeling good for others doing well, right? I think that like there's real value in that, and we do experience it, but usually it's in a very small way. And usually we reserve it for like successes our children have, especially when they're young or within family units and stuff. And the point I guess I'm making is that it could be more widespread, right? And then the other. The fourth kind of love is equanimity, and the way Buddhists see equanimity, to them it means letting go of being reactive, or letting go of reaction, and not having vested interest in everything. You don't have a dog in the fight. For them, that's their definition of equanimity. One can feel aversion or desire and not act on it, right? So you don't have to act on what the point is, what you're feeling, right? You just, they don't have to inform your behaviors and your decision making. Now, equanimity in a Western, the way we define it in the Western world, is mental calmness, composure, and an even temperance, right, or temperament, especially in difficult situations, right? So those two definitions like closely parallel each other, but there are slight differences, right? Because the Buddhist view is you're not being reactionary. You don't behave like you have a vested interest in things, right? So that's mental calmness. That's composing yourself. That's being being even-minded and even-handed, because it leads to behavior, right? So, so I think again, I tend to align with their definition, a Buddhist definition of love. Like to me, it's way more endearing, right? That this Buddhist view of how to love, how to give of yourself, right? So, most of it's like, completely self-explanatory. Right?
The last word I needed a definition on.
Equanimity.
I don't think I've come across that word often at all.
Well, probably it's a word I should probably use more often, but it's a reference to to a state of your being. So again, people should be more familiar with the word.
Right. I think people might consider it like the state of mind where you're like in balance, things just
like that.
easy.
It's just this even temperament, this even-mindedness, like that you're open and you don't behave out of bias, right? So even equanimity could be seen as interchangeably with objectivity.
Okay.
Right? So
I was thinking, why haven't I heard this word? I swear I know it. Why isn't it written on every building?
I'm sure you've heard it before, right? So we've at length so far today have discussed interdependence, but I wanted to talk about the Buddhist view of interdependence, right? So, which holds that all things come into being through the mutual interactions of various causes and conditions. No one can live entirely on their own. We need each other. So, we have our requirement for one another, but we don't have to be attached to one another, right? So again, the value of teamwork, as you pointed out earlier, right? That the sense of community allows for us to accomplish more working together than working at odds with each other. And modern day society is this weird half-assed arrangement of self-interest and recognizing the value and being selfless and like working as a team, right? But it's this hodgepodge, and damn, it's like so it's a hodgepodge, and it makes it can make for tumultuous interactions, right? Because it's juggling between selfish self-interest and the understanding that you can't survive on your own and you can't do everything on your own. That at some point there is a requirement for the assistance of others. Right? So there's value in cultivating relationships that are meant to move each other forward, right?
There's a lot to be said about community, but yeah, I can't imagine anybody would assume they could be alone. They may feel like they want to be, but how?
Well, I again, well, because some people get caught up in that stuff. I think for me, I move between solitude and socializing. I like working with people, but I like also working on my own. So I don't struggle with it. I'm perfectly fine with in both instances, and my life's made up of independent work and then work that requires dependency on others, right? So like I said, I don't. To me, it seems obvious, but again, we, it is kind of ongoing within the context of society, but because we recognize the value that to have the support of others when you're trying to do something, right? And if there's common community goal, it's achieved better when we're all working towards that goal versus working towards your self-interest, right?
Right. There's definitely skills to work on to contribute to the whole, but if you're somebody that strictly isolates, it's how is that meaningful? Like maybe they find the experience.
I don't know. You'd have to ask somebody like
Right.
that. I can't relate to that, even though I do appreciate solitude and my alone time,
Right.
which I'm not just. It's not idle time. I'm
You're
not
no
spending
hermit.
it doing nothing. I'm productive in that time, but that's why I need to be alone. I require not to be able to pursue those things without distraction, right? Which sometimes other people, that's what they represent. If they're there when you're trying to do this single person kind of work, it actually it's a hindrance, right?
Right. At either extreme, it's insane.
I don't think, again, I think that between those two extremes, that balancing point is what everybody should be seeking, right? That, or could seek, that you get the benefits of solitude and the benefits of the community working together, right?
Yes. 100% agree.
Well, and so then this idea of the community working together, or even in your solitude, ultimately you can sum all that up as interconnectedness. That we are completely dependent on each other. If you were completely isolated, out in the middle of nowhere by yourself, without any interactions with any other human beings, I dare say you probably wouldn't survive. Not for long, anyway.
Mentally, even if you could survive, mentally, you're losing it.
I would agree. So
Well said.
the connectedness is a state of being where you recognize your connection with each other. It's an important tenet in Buddhism, because in Buddhism there's no distinction, no separation between me and you. We're the same, at least in their view. I only chose Buddhism because, again, it's just one of the ones that, for me, represented interesting reading in my life, and where a lot of the views were actually simple, straightforward. So, it appealed to my sensibilities. So again, so just sharing it because it appealed to my sensibilities, right? So, and interconnectedness is really about the relationship with everything, the environment and other people, everything. Really, that's their view, right? So it's a philosophical, spiritual idea that the connection of all things, from the natural world to our personal experience to the universe at large, all these things are not separate. They're all connected, right? Now, in a very material reductionist science view, you they would say it's the opposite. Everything's separate, right? And again, I don't see the benefit in that view. But I don't hold it against them for thinking that way. That's just their way, right?
There's a huge benefit to thinking of things as separate systems in order to study. However, on a physical level, you cannot argue that we are separate. I'm touching the air is touching the side of the side of the building is touching the air in there. The idea of disconnection, it's like you sleep like 3 meters away from literally anything else that's in that area.
So okay, so interconnectedness, you could also see it as a partial dependency and a partial independency. So
Yes.
it's a paradox, right? Like that like and again, you can't have one without the other, right? The ultimate expression of yin and yang, right?
It's such an interesting paradox. I would love to get into this.
Well, again, in and of itself, that can be its own podcast,
Absolutely.
right? So interdependence and interconnectedness involves a balance of self and others within like in terms of relationships, and you're working to be present and meet each other's physical and emotional needs in an appropriate and meaningful way. But it requires you to be present, right? So we discussed this earlier. It's another way of saying paying attention. Because if you're paying attention, you don't need to be reminded that you need to help somebody. You'll do it because you're in the moment. You recognize the requirement for it and you meet the requirement. You don't wait for somebody else to do it. You recognize the fact that you're there and there's a requirement that somebody needs and you can fill that requirement. So I would argue, therefore, you're obligated to fill that requirement. And so that's the benefit of meditation. It leads you to that thinking, right? So again, enormous, you can't stress that enough, right?
And that requires objectivity and openness, of course. Because if you're self-centered and you're thinking, I can't help change that stranger's tire, I want to go have lunch. You don't have that availability. Lunch won't be there.
And again, it's because we're so densely populated. There's a disillusionment of responsibility. You don't feel like that you're obligated to help each other, right? Because usually it's not because people like are hurtful or hateful.
Right.
It's because they think somebody else is going to do it.
Right. It's like the snake is more scared of you.
So again, it's all of this is food for thought, stuff to consider that's worthy of your consideration, and that it can influence the way that you conduct yourself in the course of your life from day to day, moment to moment. Right? So I think we've come to a close. How far along are we?
I made a mistake and let the screen lock again.
Okay, you're kind of silly.
You're fired. In my opinion, it seems almost ass backwards. If anything, maybe...
I think you're ass backward.
Okay, you're not wrong. I would assume that people would socialize just because of how we came up as animals. Like,
okay, go ahead.
For the longest time, we've lived in, like I'm talking about, like cradle of civilization. Once we started working on infrastructure, we had huts, and the main area, which is the only area in a hut, is called the hall. Now you think about a hall or a hallway. Here,
it's a common space, a common area, right? So again, common community, right?
Right, like we all slept in one room together, then all of a sudden we have a washroom, then we have a kitchen. Like this infrastructure is just um, context based. You could sleep in the kitchen together. It's still the communal area.
Uh, I think an entire dwelling is a communal area, no matter how much we segregate like the spaces within a building.
Yeah, it's just categories.
Yeah, I mean, like, oh, the living room, the dining room, the kitchen, the bathroom. I'm like, it's all one space, right? So
Yeah, why isn't every room the living room?
well, you seriously, you could live in virtually every room. Okay, so time check.
We are at 1 hour 35 minutes.
Okay, I think this might be a perfectly good place to close this episode. But before I close, I'd like to read this quote. Right, so it's by Neil deGrasse Tyson, and it's fitting. It really fits the topic of conversation, and I hope you like it. Right, recognize that the very molecules that make up your body, the atoms that construct the molecules, are traceable to the crucibles that were once the centers of high-mass stars that exploded their chemically rich guts into the galaxy, enriching pristine gas clouds with the chemistry of life, so that, and this is the important part, we are all connected to each other biologically, and to the earth chemically, and to the rest of the universe atomically. That's kind of cool. That makes me smile, and I actually feel quite large at the end of that. It's not that we are better than the universe. We are part of the universe. We are in the universe, and the universe is in us. Right? I think that really does kind of nicely sum it up. Right? And whether you like him or not, props for that stream of thought. So, so in closing, I'd like to say, question everything, including yourself. Seek balance. Seek knowledge. Seek understanding. Become a renegade, individualist, humanist, critical, objective thinker. I want to thank you for your time. Have a wonderful day or night wherever you are.